Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to take a powerful document from history, a blistering intellectual defense written in 1874 by George Jacob Holyoake, and use it as a shortcut to understanding the complex relationship between skepticism, civil rights, and intellectual honesty in the Victorian era.
And this deep dive is crucial because it's not just academic. We are tracking a fundamental repositioning, how a despised, dangerous, and, well, a legally actionable concept, atheism, was intellectually renovated.
Right.
Holyoake wasn't just defending a philosophical position. He was arguing that the skeptic, the person who pauses exactly where verifiable knowledge ends, was not some lawless anarchist or a moral degenerate, but in fact someone upholding the highest intellectual standards.
Okay, let's unpack this. Holyoake is trying to wrench the definition of atheism away from being, in his words, a lawless thing and a mere negation. He wants to establish it as a disciplined, positive, and politically vital intellectual position.
He does.
But to understand the sheer force of his argument, we have to start with the terrifying reality that drove it. The outlaw status of belief in 19th century England.
That's the core tension. You have to remember this context.
Yeah.
If you were known to be an atheist, you were essentially stripped of basic civil protections. Holyoake wasn't theorizing about social rejection. He was responding to legislative action and political exclusion.
So tell us specifically about that political context. What were the actual legal stakes in the 1870s?
Well, the problem centered entirely on the judicial system and the necessity of the religious oath.
The oath.
Yes. Holyoake references the refusal of Sir George Cornwall Lewis and the government to alter the law that denied skeptics the basic right of affirmation in courts of law.
And affirmation is what exactly?
It meant swearing the truth of your testimony without invoking a divine being, specifically, without swearing upon the Bible, or a belief in a God who would punish you if you lied.
And if you couldn't affirm, what was the practical, devastating consequence?
It meant your word was legally worthless. Totally inadmissible.
Wow.
Holyoake pointed out that the testimony of an honest, cultivated, reputable person who admitted to being an atheist was, quote, placed below that of a convicted felon who was willing to perform the necessary ritual of the oath, even if that felon was an obvious liar.
That distinction is shocking. It wasn't about philosophical disagreement at all. It was about whether you could legally protect your life or your property.
Exactly. Just imagine the vulnerability. If you were an atheist, this legal exclusion exposed you to plunder or assault without legal redress.
Meaning if someone stole from you or physically harmed you and you were the only witness?
Your testimony was legally nullified, gone, simply because you refused to swear on a deity you didn't believe in. The system effectively granted a monopoly of veracity to the theist. Only the person who confessed belief could be trusted by the state.
A monopoly of veracity. That phrase cuts right to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? Holyoake wasn't petitioning for theological tolerance. He was fighting for the fundamental right to exist, to protect his family and his livelihood under the law.
And this legal reality, it forced his hand into political action. He argued that because the government was so insistent on this exclusion, merely holding a quiet, private, skeptical view was no longer enough.
It wasn't an option anymore.
Not at all. A widespread skeptical propaganda became, in his words, a parliamentary necessity.
So he's suggesting that fighting for rights through persistence, through organized public activism, was now a moral duty for the skeptic.
It was the only option left.
Yeah.
He drew a parallel to the Quakers, who through decades of persistence and organization had finally won their rights of affirmation without taking the oath. Holyoake believed the skeptics had to adopt the same militant, disciplined political strategy.
Otherwise, they'd just be ignored.
Or worse, silence for the alleged atheist was consenting to a state of civil degradation and effective slavery.
That need for organization and civil recognition sets up the intellectual pivot perfectly. If they were going to be politically active, they couldn't use language that sounded evasive or, criminal.
Yes, exactly.
He realized he had to change the vocabulary of the fight to succeed. So while he uses the term atheism for its political utility to confront the people who use it as a basis for exclusion, his actual goal is to introduce superior, more accurate terminology.
Yes. He understood that language shapes thought and dictates how you are treated. He knew the old term was just too burdened with historical baggage.
So what does he propose?
He proposes two new, powerful, and precise concepts. The intellectual affirmative expression of this philosophical stance, he argues, should be properly called cosmism.
Cosmism, as in a belief system centered on the cosmos.
Precisely. And for the movement focused on ethical conduct and civil rights here on Earth, he endorsed the term secularism, which by 1874 was already becoming the preferred terminology, superseding the historically loaded term infidelity.
It's a linguistic strategy.
It's entirely a linguistic strategy, all about achieving self-respect and precision in public life.
Let's move into that linguistic battleground now, because Holyoake is incredibly sharp about the power of words. The critique of existing terminology is really foundational to his whole argument for intellectual honesty and self-defense.
And the first word he targets is infidelity. He says this is a term he detests.
Why? What's so bad about it?
The word itself is designed to smear the skeptic. It implies a moral failure, faithlessness, lack of loyalty. It's just heavy with negative judgment.
And it suggests an intellectual compromise, right? Holyoake argues that calling someone an infidel implies they believe just enough to avoid immediate social reproach, but have too much timidity to carry doubt to a definite or legitimate result.
Exactly. He sees it as a word of cringing and evasion, designed for those who are afraid to fully commit to their doubt. He rejects that intellectual cowardice outright.
It's a powerful critique. He's saying that if you're going to doubt, you must doubt with rigor and courage. If you don't believe, say you don't believe. Don't use a word that suggests you failed to fulfill some kind of duty of belief. Contrast that, then, with his use of the word atheism. It's a word he acknowledges is deeply problematic. It has wanton negative associations. It's been battered and abused by centuries of misrepresentation. Yet he uses it initially because he views it as a defiant, militant word.
It has clarity. It rings of decision.
Yeah.
Unlike the cringing infidel, the atheist immediately confronts the opponent and, as he says, keeps no terms with superstition. It's an aggressive tactical move.
So the tactic is, if you accuse me of atheism to exclude me, I will accept that label, but then I will immediately redefine it and demonstrate its superior moral discipline.
Yes, that's it, perfectly. And this pivot, accepting the label only to redefine it, is what allows him to introduce the crucial intellectual distinction. The difference between negative atheism and affirmative atheism.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Well, the old form, negative atheism, is the straw man that theists constantly attacked. It was characterized as mere negation, a vacuum of ignorance, sometimes even associated with moral licentiousness, lust, gluttony, and talk of outrage.
So it's just, I reject God, maybe out of an emotional reaction, but there's nothing positive there.
Exactly. It asserts there is nothing beyond the universe, but offers no positive intellectual framework in its place.
But the new form, the one he champions as affirmative atheism or cosmism, is the atheism of reflection, discipline, and science.
Right. Holyoake frames this as a proud, honest, intrepid, self-respecting attitude of the mind. It's not just about what you don't believe, but what you do believe in.
And its definition is incredibly precise. To be an affirmative atheist or a cosmist means what exactly?
It means to believe in nature, in its self-existence, its self-subsistence, its self-action, its eternity, infinity, and materiality, and in that only.
Wow.
It's a radical commitment to the known, observable, physical universe as being the beginning, the middle, and the end of reality.
That commitment to self-existence is the key, isn't it? It means nature isn't created, dependent, or contingent on anything else. It simply is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It removes the entire necessity for a first cause outside of the universe. Holyoake is stating that the universe is eternal and sufficient unto itself. It's a completely self-contained system. And this philosophical commitment is why the language of cosmism is so simple and powerful.
I find the language he recommends for the cosmos wonderfully humble and precise. It doesn't deny God aggressively, it just asserts intellectual limits.
He has that great line, I do not say there is no God, but this I say I know not.
Right. It pauses precisely where objective knowledge ends and speculative assertion begins. It's scientific reservation, not reckless denial.
And to demonstrate that this is a serious intellectual tradition, Holyoake cites huge respected contemporary figures as its illustrators. He mentions Alexander von Humboldt, whose monumental work, Cosmos, was dedicated to illustrating the universe as a self-existing, unified, interconnected physical system.
And Auguste Comte, the father of positivism, whose positive philosophy insisted that we must limit knowledge strictly to observable facts and phenomena, abandoning theological and metaphysical questions.
By linking cosmism to Humboldt and Comte, Holyoake is saying, look, my belief isn't some anarchic gut feeling. It is the philosophical conclusion reached by the greatest minds studying the structure of the universe. It immediately elevates the intellectual status of the position.
He also includes a third nuance from his friend, the writer G.H. Lewis' suspensive atheism.
Yes, which describes the reflective skeptic who holds a reluctant uncertainty, waiting longingly for more light.
That's a powerful image. The skeptic as the patient, hopeful seeker, not the closed-minded denier.
So Holyoke provides a full intellectual map for you. To believe in nature only is affirmative atheism cosmism. To believe in something besides nature is theism. And to believe in the consciousness of nature, that nature itself is divine, is pantheism.
And cosmism stands alone.
It stands alone as the space of pure, factual commitment to the observable reality of the universe.
But let's remember the political goal here. For organizing and winning civil rights, this deep philosophical commitment to cosmism might be too narrow. That's why he ultimately prefers secularism as the practical movement.
Secularism is the umbrella for public life. It concerns itself with the moral life of man and maintains a well-advised neutrality upon these speculative questions. It's pragmatic. It says, let's set aside the arguments about God, eternity, and creation and focus on ethical conduct and human improvement here and now.
So it exchanges the verbal distractions of conflicting creeds for the clear criterions of moral truth. Instead of arguing about dogma, you focus on measurable, real-world duty.
Exactly. And to illustrate the ideal secularist, Holyoke expressed great sympathy for George Eliot's character, Adam Bede, the strong-headed, manly, sharp-tempered secular carpenter.
Right, the character who has an energetic satisfaction in his work and an impatience for dreamers.
It's the celebration of practical, moral action over abstract speculation.
That foundation of intellectual precision and self-respect rejecting infidelity, redefining atheism as cosmism, and adopting secularism as the movement leads us directly to the moral framework. Holyoke's central defense is built on what he calls the four structural limits of atheism.
These limits are everything. They are the intellectual discipline required to make skepticism a moral force, rescuing it from the charge of lawlessness or a moral vacuum. They ensure the cosmist avoids the pitfalls, the chasms of mere negation, which are dogmatism, denunciation, and irreverence.
Let's start with limit 1, positivism in principle. This is about asserting the realism of nature. Affirmative atheism asserts the self-existence, eternity, and infinity of nature. It's about building a positive commitment to what is real.
And this is where Holyoke flips the moral script on its head, which is arguably the most radical part of his essay. He claims that theism is actually the negation of nature.
Wait, how can a belief system that posits a creator be the negation of creation? That's a complete inversion of accepted morality.
Holyoke justifies it by saying, theism refuses to recognize the self-existence, the self-action, the self-subsistence, eternity, and infinity of the universe. To say the universe is dependent on an external force is to deny its inherent reality and sufficiency. He argues theism becomes a species of impiety towards nature, supplanting natural law with an artificial superstition.
So the religious person is the true denier, refusing to accept the universe as complete.
That's his argument. It's a radical reframing. And he uses a great analogy to emphasize the danger of mere negation. If you merely tear down the altar of superstition, the negative act, the mind is left without substance.
That's the analogy.
He says the negative subjects are like swallowing lime and pebbles for digestion.
Lime and pebbles.
They might assist the digestive system by purging the old errors, but they don't sustain the mental system. If you feed the mind only stones, it will fare ill. If you merely pluck up the weeds of worship, the ground is left fallow, useless, and vulnerable to being filled with miasma.
So the positive complement is absolutely necessary. Affirmative atheism must teach something concrete and sustaining.
It must teach that nature is the Bible of truth, that work is worship, that duty is dignity, and that the unselfish service of others is consolation. It provides a moral compass that redirects the reverence stripped away from the supernatural back into the human and the physical world, into duty and service.
Okay, that makes sense. Moving on to limit 2, exactness in profession of opinion. This seems to be purely about intellectual rigor and avoiding hypocrisy. The logic begins in self-confession, not to say you see when you do not.
This elevates intellectual honesty above all else, even if it leads to social condemnation. Holyoke grounds this in classical wisdom, citing Socrates and Plato's notion that conscious and confessed ignorance is a better state of mind than the fancy without the reality of knowledge.
In other words, if you know you don't know, you're intellectually superior to someone who merely fancies they know.
Precisely. And this leads to the powerful idea of the offense of accuracy. Holyoke suggests that the atheist is condemned by society not because they know less, since he argues none know anything certain concerning the existence of God, but because they profess less.
Their refusal to claim certainty Their greater accuracy of mind and speech, that is the offense.
Yes, because it's a reproach to everyone else who conducts their life based on secondhand opinions they inherited or assumed for social comfort. It highlights the intellectual laziness of the majority.
This accuracy also means rejecting what he calls verbiage. This is the critique of theological language.
Yes. Holyoake observes that theists often substitute attributes for existence. They say God is light or love or power or spirit. But in doing so, they confuse the attribute with the subject itself. They are merely filling the imagination with inspiring words without satisfying the understanding.
It's like feeding the thoughts with air.
That's his metaphor, leaving the intellect hungry for substance. Cosmism demands precision. It enforces a scientific reservation in expression.
And this exactness is a key form of self-defense, correct? If you allow your opponent to choose your name and your terms, they can defeat you easily.
Precisely. Holyoake argues well-chosen terms are the true weapons of opinion. If you allow yourself to be labeled infidel or negative atheist, you are defeated by a libel. By enforcing scientific reservation, the cosmist protects their position from mischaracterization. It arises from an honorable unwillingness to use words that do not represent definite ideas.
Let's move to limit 3, dispassionateness in judgment. If the first two limits deal with the object of belief and the language used, this one deals with the attitude. It's about avoiding dogmatism, which Holyoake calls the sin of superstition.
Dogmatism is believing yourself infallible, which immediately shuts your mind off from reason, regardless of whether you are a skeptic or a believer. The cosmist must keep his mind open, even to the possibility of being wrong, because the pursuit of truth is ongoing.
This principle is beautifully illustrated by the anecdote he shares from the Reverend Charles Marriott of Oriel College. The clergyman confessed that he had always more hope of the atheist than of the dissenter.
It's high praise, isn't it? And it highlights a crucial point about intellectual openness. The clergyman saw the dissenter as stuck in little infallibility of his own, a fixed dogma that made him unreachable by external argument.
But the
atheist, disciplined by cosmism, was always to be reached by reason. This shows that Holyoake's disciplined skepticism was recognized even by the opposition as being fundamentally rational and open to inquiry.
And this discipline also informs the tactics for truth. When promoting an unpopular truth, you can't just alienate people.
Correct. Unpopular truth must use respectfulness of tone and fairness of speech to placate opposition. Holyoake distinguishes sharply between two actions, compromising principle and giving offense.
And the difference is,
you must never compromise principle, which he defines as submission to error, but you must never outrage the opposition, because that simply makes the errorist deaf to reason. It's a call for strategic rhetoric paired with absolute intellectual fortitude.
Finally, we reach limit 4, humanism in conception or reliance on humanity. This dictates where the skeptic places their moral and practical standard. Every thinker must choose a standard outside the universe or within it. Cosmism chooses the standard within humanity.
And this is where the philosophy becomes a system for effective social action. Relying on humanity leads to critical principles: self-trust, self-direction, and self-regulation. The responsibility for morality, which others view as a necessity imposed by God, becomes for the cosmist a duty and a pride.
The ultimate proof of this principle lies in the remarkable example he cites of General Jacob, the commander of the Sindh horse in India. This anecdote is powerful because it proves that secular methods yield concrete, measurable moral progress.
Yes, General Jacob applied these secular principles: self-reliance, discipline, human dignity, amid a barbarous people in Sindh, where generations of Christian missionary efforts had completely failed to curb violence.
How did it work in practice? What specific methods did Jacob use?
Well, Jacob focused entirely on practical, observable solutions. He didn't rely on conversion or theological threat. He established rational laws focused on education, economic stability, and rigorous discipline based on secular justice.
And the results.
Holyoake reports that through the application of these humanist principles, Jacob raised thousands of the wildest robbers and murderers into kindly and industrious citizens. It was proof that reliance on human capacity, reason, and duty worked better than reliance on external theology or divine threat.
That is a direct, measurable counterpoint to the idea that atheism leads to lawlessness. It actually leads to more effective law and morality.
And it also leads to a more refined sense of reverence. Holyoake makes a sharp critique of irreverent worship. He observes that reliance on humanity actually improves reverence because it eliminates the presumption that often accompanies familiar theological claims.
You mean the familiarity, the lack of delicacy?
Precisely. He notes that educated ministers often address God with praise, familiarity, and a lack of measure that they would be ashamed to offer to any gentleman.
Whereas the cosmist,
The cosmist, by contrast, exercises profound intellectual humility before the vastness of the universe.
yeah.
If they are doubtful, they are doubtfully reverent. They reject the presumption of definitive knowledge.
So those four limits, positivism, exactness, dispassionateness, and humanism, provide a complete moral code. Holyoake sums up personal duty in three words: honor, morality, and love. Respecting the truth, acting the truth, and serving the truth. This is what rescues the skeptic from the charges of being lawless.
And having established this framework of disciplined skepticism, Holyoake then turns his attention to the traditional emotional foundations of religion, the God of prayer, providence, and the afterlife, to show why the thoughtful skeptic must reject them as incompatible with what he calls the austere facts of reality.
Okay, let's start with the traditional concept of the God of prayer and providence. For many believers, this concept offers comfort, the belief in an actively intervening, loving force. But Holyoake points to the problem of suffering.
He asks us to look at the vast scenes of sorrow where every word is a prayer and every pulsation a pang. If we suppose an interposing providence, a God who chooses to intervene and comfort, how do we reconcile that with the overwhelming misery and arbitrary suffering we see constantly?
And the conclusion the cosmos reaches is surprisingly pious.
It's highly nuanced. Holyoake argues that it is more reverential to simply own theism as inscrutable, to admit we don't know the reason for suffering, than to connect all this misery with God's name.
So to attribute indiscriminate cruelty and indifference to a supposedly all-loving being is the real impiety.
That's his point. He argues that questioning the facts of nature, being sorrowful or complaining about the order of things, is effectively a censure of what could be the order of God. True reverence, therefore, lies in accepting what is.
Accepting what is.
Acceptance means accepting unmurmuringly the order of things we find. It requires believing in the completeness and self-sufficiency of nature and humanity. Our duty is not to plead for divine intervention, but simply to struggle for the right with the secular light vouchsafed to us, to exercise duty, service, and endurance here and now.
The next major segment is perhaps the most emotionally potent because Holyoake tackles the anxiety and horror created by popular religion's view of the future life and eternal punishment.
This is where the disciplined cosmist's viewpoint feels incredibly compassionate. Holyoake doesn't just deny heaven, he denies the horror of hell. He focuses on the sheer unbearable risk inherent in popular religion.
The stakes are impossibly high.
Right. He questions if every human being, even those born in the caprices of lust and vice, is a candidate for heaven, and whether one is liable to eternal perdition for acts committed before existence or for offenses predestined by fate. The idea that a brief, flawed human life dictates an infinite penalty is terrifying.
He argues that the risk is so great that it is better never to be born than to incur this frightful risk.
And compared to a life spent in constant fear of falling short and being cast into eternal torment, a life where you sport for a few years on the borders of hell, Holyoake argues that the belief in annihilation is a creed of holiness. It removes the horrific, endless cruelty implied by eternal torment, offering a compassionate final peace.
But I appreciate that this isn't simply a blanket denial of the future. He clarifies that skeptics are not disbelievers in a tolerable immortality. He articulates a profound spiritual yearning for a specific kind of continuation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Holyoake expresses a willingness to believe in a state of purification, of restoration, and progress. He defines clearly what he rejects. He craves no effeminate security, no eternity of indolence and singing.
Instead, he desires the eternal discipline of indefinite progress. That is a massive distinction. The difference between seeking comfort and seeking perpetual challenge and improvement.
It connects directly back to his core moral framework. But ultimately, all these issues, providence, prayer, the afterlife, boil down to the demand for evidence. Are we to conduct life on the basis of what we hope or what we know?
He who believes in what he wishes and teaches it as true has already passed into the gates of superstition.
Exactly. The cosmos must focus on knowledge and evidence.
And this demand for evidence leads to Holyoake's famous provocative thought about divine clarity, the ultimate placard.
It's a powerful piece of rhetoric. Holyoake asserts that had God desired his existence to be universally recognized, he would have placarded the fact on the walls of nature in letters of light, so luminous and indelible that no wayfarer, regardless of where they were born or educated, would ever be in doubt.
Since this universal placard is clearly absent, the great secret is left, evidently, to Silent thought and reverent conjecture.
Right. The lack of overwhelming, undeniable evidence is, in itself, a profound theological fact that justifies the scientific reservation and disciplined thought of cosmism.
And this sense of disciplined, reverent conjecture culminates in the most celebrated part of Holyoke's text. The pebble analogy, the humility of nature. He shifts focus completely, moving from the unknowability of God to the ultimate, inescapable mystery of the simplest thing, a common particle of matter.
He starts small, a piece of amber, a ruby, or just a secure, humble stone. And he uses this ordinary object to demonstrate the overwhelming complexity of existence itself.
It's a superb philosophical move. We talk about the origins of God, but Holyoke asks, where did the electrical properties of amber come from? The lurid brilliancy of a ruby, the density of the stone.
And the answer is that science finds them marvels and leaves them mysteries. If the peasant and the philosopher are equally baffled by the ultimate nature of a stone, how can anyone claim to definitively know the origin of the universe?
He invites us to contemplate the unwritten history of the stone. Its antiquity is vast. It existed when human history was unwritten. It's not just a rock, it's a profound chronicler of time.
Consider the geological journey alone. Holyoke paints a stunning picture. This humble stone may have been trod upon by the mastodon. It may have been pushed and paddled into the sea by the ichthyosaurus. It may have lain for millennia in regal rest in the silent caverns of the deep, enduring tempests and earthquakes before being rediscovered on some forgotten shore.
And the human contact grounds it in our civilization, making its history even more complex. Did an Assyrian lover or a young pharaoh play with it? Was it embedded in the walls of Troy? Did it lie on the plains of Marathon, witnessing the birth of democracy? Was it dyed by the blood of Caesar in Rome?
The list of potential historical contacts is endless, and we haven't even scratched the surface of its ultimate origin. Holyoke points out that its elements were never created, they always existed. We have to account for its eternity.
Where were the parts of this pebble when the earth was without form or void? To what astral system did it once belong before our planet coalesced?
If matter is eternal, Holyoke concludes, this stone, in its countless transmutations, is a geological wandering Jew of eternity.
A geological wandering Jew of eternity.
It is a transient resident of our physical universe, yet its components are infinitely old. This humble stone, existing securely in the palm of your hand, is a surpassing mystery.
That is the conclusion of humility. If we cannot tell the complete history of this single, commonplace particle of matter, a secure physical object, who among us is qualified to tell the complete history and nature of God? The profound, self-evident mystery inherent in a pebble should enforce caution and scientific reservation on every metaphysicist.
And this heightens his critique of the reckless claim. Holyoke challenges the pretension and presumption of the person who, pausing not in reverent humility before these myriad miracles, tells us in confident and dogmatic tones that he looks through nature up to nature's God.
That claim implies an infinite capacity of mind that the simple reality of the natural world, the mystery of the stone, directly contradicts. The humility required to appreciate the complexity of the pebble is the exact intellectual humility that drives the cosmist position.
And so, the episode must conclude this section by affirming the position of the cosmist, standing not in denial but in mute wonder, listening with greedy ears to the secret tale of nature, and waiting with undying interest for the revelations of science, thought, time, or death.
So, what does this all mean for you, the listener, today? We've traced George Jacob Holyoke's path. He didn't just defend skepticism, he restructured it, taking the politically poisoned word atheism and forging it into a philosophy of disciplined intellectual integrity he called cosmism.
The synthesis is clear. The essential differences between negative atheism, which is a mere lawless rejection, and disciplined cosmism, which is an affirmative, highly moral belief in the reality and self-sufficiency of nature.
And we saw that the entire impetus for this philosophical reframing was profoundly political, the fundamental demand for civil rights, for honor, and for legal affirmation in Victorian England.
By adhering to the four limits, positivism, exactness, dispassionateness, and humanism, Holyoke provided a complete moral framework. He rescued skepticism from the imputation of lawlessness by summing up personal duty in honor, morality, and love, respecting, acting, and serving the truth.
And that standard is ultimately driven by the profound humility we witnessed when contemplating the history of the pebble.
If the smallest particle of matter is a geological wandering Jew of eternity, utterly inscrutable in its history and nature, the intellectual must approach all of existence with profound caution.
So if the universe has never been convinced by a clear placard of deity, and if the smallest physical particle remains a surpassing mystery, perhaps the greatest irreverence is not doubt.
But the claim of definitive, simple knowledge concerning things that are infinitely complex and mysterious.
The final challenge Holyoke leaves us with, then, is to reject that yearning for effeminate security, that eternity of singing and indolence, and commit ourselves instead to the eternal discipline of indefinite progress.
It is the highest moral aspiration a rational mind can adopt, the lifelong active pursuit of truth, regardless of how humble the starting point may seem.